Hi, and welcome to AQ's Blog and Grill. Today's guest is Glen Drummond. Glen is the Chief Innovation Officer at Quarry Integrated Communications, and we're going to talk today about disruption. And I think Glen's got some really interesting perspectives and some insights that he's going to share with us today. So, welcome, Glen.
Hello, Alan.
How you doing?
Great to connect in this channel.
Now, Glen, you did a recent presentation, and you made the argument that our storytelling perspective around disruption might not be helping us all that much with disruption. So help us understand that. What did you mean?
Reading through the many books and seeing the many presentations that are really part of the innovation literature that deal with the topic of disruption, there's a pattern that emerges. And the pattern is that the sources of disruption are associated with non-human forces. It might be technology, it might be globalization, it might be urbanization, it might be a demographic turnover. There are all these different kinds of forces. And then there's the idea of, business models, another class of these forces where, it's every innovation conference you go to, you hear about Uber and how it's a disruptive business model. And, there's a whole set of stock stories that go back and select from, the growing list of organizations that have failed. But what's interesting is these stories sort of fit into a general group where there is a selection of an answer that is usually a little too simple to really explain what went on. And as you learn more about these stories, you find that, in fact, it wasn't just any one of those trends. It's not as tidy as the storybook version of disruption would have it. These trends are combining, they're joining forces, and my argument is by no means to say that these different forces aren't active in our contemporary business experience, rather that a theory needs to have a cause and effect and a prediction in order to be effective as a practical tool. And the difficulty is when we can't really sort out which is the real cause or how many causes there are, what we seem to see is that a group of business executives, all armed with all the same books, fully aware of all these theories, seem to be continually paralyzed by the face of change, and we're not making any progress on reversing the topple rate. It seems like the life cycle of a market-leading enterprise is becoming shorter all the time. And so it causes us to step back and ask the question, this storytelling perspective clearly accords with our viewpoint on what makes a good story, but is it practical in any material sense from a business standpoint?
In your presentation and in your current thinking, you're actually naming the customer as the agent of disruption. Can you help us go with that for a minute?
Right. So the one thing that we can see as a common element in every story of disruption is here you had a business that was making money because it had customers. And then at some point, at a rate that was surprising to the people inside the organization, those customers stopped spending money with that organization in pursuit of an experience they preferred. And it might have been a different business model or a different technology or an asymmetrical competitor, but in every case it was an experience they preferred to the one that they had had before. Mm-hmm. And so if we're looking for a theory that is a foundation for practice, there's no confusion over this one. In every single case, the customers left in pursuit of an experience they preferred.
Right. So I totally agree with that. And with you, how can businesses change the way they're thinking by changing their perspective on this?
Right. So here's what's interesting. It's not lost on most businesses, most executives, that it's important to focus on the customer. But the way they focus on the customer has to do with a set of relationships that are extremely instrumental. So when we talk about voice of the customer, we talk about operational feedback that has to do with how this customer interacts with the products and services. Now, I'm not saying that that's not relevant, But to describe the voice of the customer in such narrow terms is probably to exclude a lot of things that the customer is saying that we're not paying attention to.
Right.
When we talk about customer journey, there's a notion that all these customer journeys have this, they're united by this destination that they're buying from the organization. But we know, of course, that that's not always the case. Customer journeys can go in all sorts of directions. And when we start to think about the idea that disruption is really caused by people going to an experience they prefer, there seems to be not enough curiosity about the question of what would be the basis for experiences they prefer. Mm-hmm. How would we predict that? What do we need to know about customers that can help us anticipate that? And this, it seems to me, is the basis for the kinds of exploration that are required for an organization to be resilient over the long term.
Wow. So that kind of leads me to believe then, based on what you're hearing and understanding from the customer, you are the disruptive force with the customer.
Yeah, it calls for a different kind of curiosity. And I think a way of thinking about questions like the notion of customer loyalty. Are people loyal to the brand? Are they loyal to the business? Or are they loyal to a set of experiences? And if they are, then it's going to be important to know more than just, what's the net promoter score, but, what is it about those experiences that they like? And if those experiences are a stepping stone towards something that they're going to like better, it's an awfully good idea to understand that.
Yeah. Okay, so at the end of your presentation, which is available on SlideShare, you show a picture of a forest of redwoods. And your point that you're making at the ending on that slide is about resilience. So help us understand your message behind that image and those words.
Right. So the presentation actually begins with a storm cloud that I use as a metaphor for the way we frame disruption today. And there is no question that there is a combination of forces that are gathering steam. Those people who think about digitization and computer technology are starting to talk about, the metaphor of the second half of the chessboard, that, there are undoubtedly structural forces that are important. But since we really can't control those, we simply have to accept those, accept that they're accelerating and they're combining in interesting ways. If we shift our focus to say, the real agent of disruption is the customer exerts that agency by making choices about the experience they prefer. And then if we are, wanting to stand up to those storms, as those giant redwoods have stood up to storms and forest fires for 1,000 years and more, the way that kind of resiliency is established is, I think, a broader kind of curiosity about human beings, not about, an instrumental relationship that is restricted to those things that customers feel about us and our brands and products and services, but a broader sense of, what is it that people are trying to achieve? In what respect is the brand story connected to their self-story and their construction of meaning and identity? How can we create experiences that help to fulfill some of those symbolic goals that customers have, as well as the functional goals that are perhaps more accessible to rational analysis and have been managed pretty effectively in a lot of marketing and product solutions.
Wow, very good. Glen, thanks for joining us today. Again, to share your insights and perspective on disruption. It's been illuminating.
It's been a pleasure, Alan. Thank you very much.
So we had Glen Drummond, and Glen has been a frequent guest here, and he always continues to amaze me with his perceptions and insights, and ooh, he's a smart kid. So, thanks for joining us, and you'll see the subscribe button right over here. Subscribe to AQ's Blog and Grill, and we'll see you next time.